21 Pilots has always, forever, been a band I've underestimated and treated perhaps a little less than they deserve in my mind. I came around to them in the blurry face era, same as most other people, skeptical because I was pretty sick of stressed out being played in PE every day at school, fairly so in my view. There was a level of borderline hostility I felt for the group, even if it wasn't so explicitly targeted. I doubt I could have even identified the name of the band that early on. But one evening, when one of my older brothers had relocated from out of town back home, doing night shifts over his summer at his job, I would stay up late hanging out with him, building Legos, usually Technic then, if I remember right, watching random funny YouTube videos, talking about the Arkham games, or Destiny, or Need for Speed, or whatever other game he was interested in at any given moment, etc. But sometimes we would listen to music, watch music videos for what he had found interesting. I can still distinctly remember moments from car radio, ride, especially fairly local, and of course, stressed out too. I realized over the course of several videos that maybe there was actually something to these guys. It became apparent over a very short period of time that not only was I wrong about their to this day still #1 most streamed song, the preconceptions I had formed to the band entire were wrong. There was in fact something to this band that was so suddenly blowing up, and I had been missing out. Not long after that, I purchased the full album Blurry Face on iTunes, listened to it somewhat frequently, and was just as expectant as everybody else was when Trench arrived a few years later. But Trench started an odd sort of trend for me, a trend of listening to new TOP releases maybe a couple of times, not jiving with them so much, and quickly coming to a state of just never listening to them again. Although I never really thought about exactly why this happened, I think the large musical shifts between records had no small part in it. I'd maybe go back to Blurry Face every once in a while, but my experience and expertise with this longtime duo was for a long time defined by, well, inexperience with their work. I never even went back to Vessel until recently, and I've been unfair to much of the band's work over the years in general. So when Clancy released recently, I was morbidly curious. I wanted to know what I actually thought of 21 Pilots, basically 3 years removed from listening to any of their work at all. After listening to that brand new record once, forming a merely approximate or uncertain opinion on it, I went back to Blurry Face. Then I went to Trench. Then I continued and finished this whole four-piece story with Scaled and Icy and Clancy again, respectively. After this, I finally made my first visit to Vessel, found a way to listen to Regional at best, and capped off my journey with the self-titled album that technically started it all. When it comes right down to it, this discography ranking was a surprise to me until I decided to listen to Regional at Best and 21 Pilots. Before that, I was basically just in it for the curiosity, as I said before. But now that I'm writing this ranking, it seems like it was obvious and inevitable, and in truth, it kind of was. I'm disconnected enough from the broader TOP fanbase to feel like I'm not quite sure how well my ranking specifically will go down, but I'm also connected just enough to be confident I have a couple of potentially hot takes in here. What fun it will be to garner the ire of people I don't even know on the internet. And for the record, if I miss any references in sound or style or whatever else in TOP that is riffing on other specific musicians, just know that 1, I'm not very good at identifying that sort of thing, and 2, I'm a metalhead, so this realm of music, ironic considering that 21 Pilots doesn't really have a specific genre, this realm of music is not my specialty or my expertise. Either way, this is more than enough preamble. I think it's time we rank all of 21 Pilots' albums from worst to best. But keep in mind, this is just my opinion. At number 7, 21 Pilots. Not the worst album to exist, but it's pretty bad. I give this a 1.5 out of 5 star rating. This wasn't the best way to cap off this journey of mine through TOP's work. The self-titled is not a good album. It's not the most god-awful thing I've ever listened to, but it is heavily flawed and the only one of these albums that I wouldn't consider some manner of good or great. 21 Pilots is overlong, disinteresting, and lacking uniqueness, and only has rare fleeting moments of what Tyler would come to harness for the future. I don't want to speak too poorly about this record, but it is just not good. Nearly at all. Truthfully and unfortunately. The production and mixing is pretty bad, which I forgive and understand because it was completely independent. The songwriting is generic and overlong, seeing Tyler care seemingly more about how long the songs were rather than evolving the ideas themselves, plus too many songs feel too repetitive in sound and structure. The interesting moments are fleeting and few and far between. It starts off pretty good with some interesting and surprisingly decent or even good rap verses, but the melodies are muted and unmemorable in return. As the album goes along, it begins to circle too much in its own plodding pace that does the overall product no favors. In fairness, as I say, 21 Pilots isn't all bad. March to the Sea, despite following the trend of being too long, is actually a pretty good song with good lyrical choices. The train of tracks encompassing Aircatcher, Trapdoor, A Car, A Torch, A Death, and Taxicab each contains these fleeting moments I've referenced up to this point that hint at what Regional at best would expand on, and they generally aren't awful, but again, they're lackluster and leave one wanting rather than executing on what they seem like they're wanting to be. For a true debut body of work, I don't necessarily think I could do anything better myself, but that doesn't make 21 Pilots' self-titled record a good one either. And do I even have to talk about the way Tyler pronounces and enunciates half of these lyrics? Like, yikes. Thankfully, the rest of the discography is much, much better than this. Standout tracks: March to the Sea, my favorite track, and A Car, A Torch, A Death. At number 6, Regional at Best, the mixtape. A testament to what the band would soon become in mixtape form. Rating 3 out of 5 stars. I'm certain I'm preaching to the choir here, but in case you didn't know, Regional at Best is kind of a lost record of sorts. In the 10th anniversary livestream Josh and Tyler did for Vessel, they spoke about Regional at Best as a body of work that wasn't technically released because most of its tracks were remastered/improved for usage on Vessel, a few specifically as bonus tracks for that record as well. As such, it's somewhat difficult to listen to this record, a record I personally deem more of a mixtape due to its position as an effective precursor to their first studio recorded album, but the tracks from this that were not remastered for its later counterpart are still findable, technically, under a podcast on Spotify called RAB, the acronym for the album's title. Likewise, the full album, including the original mixtape-esque versions of all the later converted for Vessel songs, can be found on YouTube. So even though this album does not technically exist as an official release, it is still possible to listen to it. That's exactly what I did. Regional at Best is a huge step up over its predecessor in every single regard. The rapping is better, the melodies are better, the songwriting is better, the cohesion and general creative decisions are better, and the package is undeserving of having no official release, though it is understandable since nearly all of it appears on some version of Vessel. Regional at Best is held back slightly by its lesser production and mixing, same as the self-titled, due to also being independently created. There's one or two songs that aren't phenomenal, but overall Tyler found his songwriting identity with this one. That's something to celebrate, and I'm glad that I took the chance to hear these original versions of these songs in the order they were in for this release. I do have to admit that I am equally as sad as everyone else that the 5 songs that did not get remastered in some capacity have no true release though 2 or 3 of these truly unreleased songs are the worst/weakest ones on the album, and therefore for me not really that missed in the grand scheme of things. The other 2, or again maybe 3, I forget off the top of my head, are fantastic and have been maltreated by the band. Regional at Best is not the best album in the world, but the degree to which it is an improvement over the predecessor is hugely commendable and really set 21 Pilots up for success in the years to come. Standout tracks, separate from Vessel, are my favorite song, Slowtown, and Ruby. Next up, let's talk about the single, Heathens, a relatively overhyped song that doesn't stand well enough on its own, with a rating of 3 out of 5 stars. The greatest sin that Heathens makes is being overplayed without a full album backing it up. By no means is this a bad single, in fact, re-listening to it proved to me that it was better than I was giving it credit for, but still not enough to fully stand on its own. To me, Heathens could have done with a record to go along with it. Though it is sonically pretty similar to the band's work that I enjoyed the most, it is just a song that was overplayed and not good enough in my opinion to get that treatment. The lyrics are weaker than the two records that came before, and the music isn't as bouncy either. A good song, but far from a favorite. In fifth place, Trench. Albeit heavy on the lore, far and away the weakest of TOP's studio efforts. Rating 3 out of 5 stars. I have a complicated relationship with Trench. It's the most highly rated amongst the fan base, at least amongst the circles that I hang around, plus on Music Board, but I feel like I've never truly gotten it to the degree that maybe I should. Of course, that's not to completely degrade the record, because it isn't bad. In fact, Trench lands in a similar place for me as the single Heathens, in that a re-listen proved to me that I've been personally underrating it over the last few years. Still, Trench is far from my favorite. The darker tone and vibe of much of the record should absolutely land for me, more so than Blurry Face even, but often feels like it doesn't. The technicality to the lyrics and the vocal constructions are impressive, but often don't cross the threshold from my simple enjoyment into active engagement. The depth and expansion to the lore and how much more straightforward the story is compared to the other three albums in the sequence is intriguing and interesting, but somehow doesn't come anywhere close to the immersion that concept albums almost always manage to do for me. By all means, Trench should be my favorite 21 Pilots album, but it's not. On my recent re-listen, I discovered, or rediscovered, several tracks I quite enjoyed, and the diversity of the album within the tone it sets to achieve is at the very least impressive. I can at least give Trench the praise that it deserves on a technical level, because the overall writing on it I think might even be better than on Blurry Face. The quality of the music videos and the non-musical storytelling took a huge jump for this record, and the lyrics are arguably the most interesting to dive into on account of how much more forward the story is. But in the end, it doesn't fully click, thanks in no small part to just really weird decisions here and there, such as Pet Cheetah just feeling off, and often the song that identifies the album in my mind as a random example. In short, I don't really have much active criticism for Trench besides just the fact that it doesn't click for me personally. The album truly does have a lot going for it, and I understand why most people enjoy it so much in spite of it not being a hit for me. As such, I think it might be the 21 Pilots record I return to the least out of the Dima storyline, and the least of the discography besides the self-titled. Standout tracks include Jumpsuit, my personal favorite, My Blood, and Chlorine. Coming in at number 4, Scaled and Icy, a lovely album for vibes and fun, mistakenly underrated by the masses. 3.5 out of 5 stars. If my placement of Trench on this list didn't already cause people to flip tables, the fact I placed it under Scaled and Icy almost certainly has. But you gotta believe me, I'm just as surprised by this organization of the list as you are. Simply put, I had low expectations going into my re-listen of Scaled and Icy. Maybe that's what allowed it to just barely stay out of the top 3, I don't know for sure, but I do know that I'm surprised by how much I enjoyed this one upon the revisit. Much like most other people following both Blurryface and Trench, even as somebody who personally doesn't love Trench like everybody else does, Scaled and Icy was a huge disappointment. I won't deny that. Sure, a lot of us could appreciate how it played into the overall story, say for music videos and general lore surrounding the album's weirdness. It was meant to be a subversion of the story as it existed before, since Clancy's capture by Nico ended in the character having to write propaganda music for the masses instead of being a representative of resistance and escape like Trench was. In light of this bit of lore, and I apologize if there's anything about that explanation that's wrong, as I said earlier, I'm not the most familiar with the details of the story, Scaled and Icy having a huge sonic difference than its contemporaries, even more so than has already been to be expected from 21 Pilots, makes total sense. But it was still a disappointment, and a good bit of whiplash on top of that. Clearly, this album did not work for everybody. On Music Board, it's the lowest rated of the band's albums, even less than the self-titled. Side note, did you know that the self-titled is technically rated more highly than either Blurryface or Clancy as well at the time of writing? Yeah, that doesn't even make a little bit of sense to me. In spite of this fact, and the fact that I did not care one bit for this album the first time I listened to it, I really enjoyed it this time around. I wonder why this was, but I don't think I have any proper explanation for it. I think I was extremely unfair to Scaled and Icy back in 2021. The fact I only listened to it that once and that was it tells me all I need to know on that front. I underrated it, and everybody else did too. Scaled and Icy is a load of fun musically, a bop even. Several of the songs are worthy of my love solely for how fun they are to listen to when getting ready for work in the early morning. It is, overall, not the deepest listening experience, but solely for the vibes and the fun of it, I really like it. Nearly every track is its own version of a bop, and at the very least, the album contains one of T.O.P.'s best songs in Shy Away. Though I should also note that the lyrical meaning of the album is still deeper than the music is. Look no further than Redecorate, a shockingly dark song, for evidence on that. Most important to this ranking, however, is my opinion, as I stated it before, that not only was I heavily unfair to this album, I think almost everybody else was unfair too. If you haven't listened to this one in quite some time and feel like you remember it being bad, maybe give it another shot with better expectations. Standout tracks include Good Day, Shy Away, which is one of my favorites, Saturday, and my other favorite, Redecorate. Now let's talk about the single, Level of Concern, a very fun, though slightly long, single to tide the fans over in quarantine, with another 3.5 out of 5 star rating. Level of Concern is too long, I confess. It doesn't have enough ideas going for it to keep it from being a bit too much to have on repeat, but there's just something so special about it in spite of this that keeps me from holding that fact against it. During a time when people were stuck in their homes, the pointed lyrics felt comforting instead of dismal, and the whole tone and vibe of the song is just fun. It's fun, catchy, and has a great chorus. On top of all that, the music video is super cute and cheery. Even though it is a little long, it's one of the band's best tracks. And to start off the top 3, we have Clancy in 3rd place. At first, nothing impressive, immensely more impressive on the re-listen, with another 3.5 out of 5 star rating. The first time that I listened to Clancy, I was mixed at best. Sonically, it's the most similar to Scaled and Icy over anything else in 21 Pilots' catalog, but does have a ton of callbacks to all of the other previous albums in Clancy's story, and also still manages to retain its own identity apart from those previous releases. The achievement in that string of clauses is no small feat, so I respect T.O.P. for managing that. But on my first listen, I wasn't so high on it. Immediately after the album was over, I remember thinking, well, that was better than SAI, but still pretty meh. Needless to say, I was pretty wrong about that. But that first go did inspire me to check out the rest of the story, this time in order. As I said in the introduction, I returned to Blurry Face and worked through Trench and Scaled and Icy to follow, finally returning to Clancy for a re-listen after all of that, having spent some time trying to open my mind to appreciate what the band was doing with this new release through Sonic Evolution, to appreciate it for what it actually is rather than what I wanted it to be. That helped me see Clancy a bit differently, and it is truthfully a very good album. Thinking on it, I can't rightly say whether I prefer the sound of this one or SAI, but Clancy is definitely a similarly fun time with subtly profound lyrical choices that just feel great to pick apart. On repeat listens, songs will thrillingly keep you on your toes as you suddenly realize what some lines or references mean in context. Oh, and Josh's drumming on this album is probably the most advanced / intricate that it's ever been. As a drummer, I really loved the attention to detail. I'll confess that the story has been a little more lost on me overall this time around, something that the music video revisits is helping with, thankfully, but the existence of music videos for every track on Clancy is a decision I really love and respect. It's from this point, now in the top 3 of the band's discography, that I exceed the 2 or 3 standout tracks and list a few more of them. And fair warning, I'm gonna note more than one favorite for each of these last 3 records. Why? Well, because this is my ranking and I can do what I want, that's why. I should also add that, unsurprisingly, many of my favorite moments on the album are most reminiscent of Blurry Face, which probably says a lot. For the standout tracks, I have picked Backslide, Midwest Indigo, Routines in the Night, Navigating, Snap Back, At the Risk of Feeling Dumb, and Paladin Straight, with my 3 favorite tracks being Midwest Indigo, Routines in the Night, and Snap Back. P.S. It's an absolute travesty that Tyler didn't want to include two of the hands down best songs on Clancy in Routines in the Night and Navigating. Absolutely insane to me. Coming in at second place, Vessel. A home run swing for a, for all intents and purposes, debut studio effort. 4 out of 5 stars. For some reason, I never circled back to Vessel over the years in spite of my relative obsession with its successor, so my recent listen of the album was actually my first, and what a first impression. For what it's worth, I did listen to Vessel before going back to find the original regional at best, so even the songs that were remastered and lightly adjusted for this release were brand new for me in context. Not that I necessarily need to specify that. I think mostly only the top TOP fans, pun mildly intended, have bothered to get access to regional at best in the first place. But Vessel is such a fun album. We see Tyler's songwriting as it was in regional at best, and then the effect that Josh's drumming and the proper production are able to make on the product, completing it for all intents and purposes. Tyler said on the 10th anniversary stream for the record that many of the songs that were brought to the table were barely edited, if at all, as far as the songwriting is concerned, because the producer was already very impressed with the product. If you've listened to regional at best, this is definitely true. We see songs Tyler wrote for something else, the previous ultimately unreleased record, moved around a bit and polished into something more truly wonderful. For full effect, I recommend listening to the bonus track version of Vessel since 4 more songs from RAB were brought over for it, and 3 of those are amongst the best on the entire release, in my opinion. In this release, we get a record that is very likely the most replayable from the band on account of it not being so deep on lore and story the way the Dima storyline is. We see the final form of Tyler's initial vision for these songs, complete with a tangible coming into his own for rapping and singing, and writing lyrics and creating songs in general. We see the beginnings of what Josh and Tyler as a duo are able to accomplish, a starting point for the next decade of their work together that feels nostalgic, even for somebody who never listened to it until now. Like, seriously, how is it possible to make me feel so deeply melancholic for a past I never experienced, or rather for memories I never had? Listening to Vessel, I feel like I was transported to junior high school, a time before I discovered 21 Pilots in the first place. Vessel just feels like a gem of its era, and next to none of it has aged poorly. Suffice it to say, I think this might be the album I return to the most often besides my number 1 pick from here on out. Hell, there's a chance I come back to this one more often due to how independent it is. Very close to no songs on Vessel are weak, and several of the songs are just so perfect. This record is an absolute joy through and through. The main and nigh-on only criticism I can levy at Vessel is simply that Tyler's vocal and lyrical delivery in some cases is still messy, like the self-titled. Nothing nearly so egregious, but it sticks out like a sore thumb in those moments compared to the whole succeeding decade of their work. Standout tracks include Holding On to You, Migraine, Screen, Fake You Out, Trees, Glowing Eyes, and Forest. Like I said, this includes the bonus tracks, with my 3 favorite tracks being Screen, Glowing Eyes, and Forest. And finally, topping off the list, taking the crown for the discography, Blurry Face, which aged even better than I thought it could, let alone would, with a rating of 4.5 out of 5 stars. Based on the references I've been making over the course of this ranking, most of you might not be surprised to find yourselves here, or rather to find me here. And many of you are probably want to say it's the nostalgia bomb placing Blurry Face above the rest of the crowd. To that I say, silence, fool! But realistically, I am certain it's more than just nostalgia doing this. Coming into this re-listen, I was actually expecting to think a little less of Blurry Face given the handful of years separating me from my previous listen besides. But I was wrong. I found I actually liked a decent chunk of these songs more than I previously had, including the ones I didn't much love before. Every track feels like it serves a purpose, even though the story found herein is the most abstract and uncertain in relativity. That is, most of the story of Blurry Face seems to be circled around conceptual ideas of a character called Blurry Face, and maybe a few specific moments that would become the precursor to the narrative, rather than itself being a fully fleshed story on its own. But speaking of the story, I have at least been shocked to rewatch several of the music videos for the album and see so many story references that seem so obvious in hindsight. Such as Josh's yellow hair in Heavy Dirty Soul being the most clear-cut clue hidden in plain sight. Given that Josh as the torchbearer amongst the Bandidos is the confirmed real version of that character as per the Clancy release livestream, this clue had countless folks smacking themselves in the forehead for being so blind. But beyond the story, the musicality itself is just the most to my liking when it comes to 21 Pilots. There is nostalgia, sure, but even the sonic diversity sees the most overlap with what I do enjoy about TOP's style. I respect the band for their willingness to adapt and do different things, garnering themselves a reputation of being a genre almost all their own, but that does come with the territory of some music molding most to an individual's taste while other material, well, maybe other material doesn't so much. This point should be obvious to anybody, but is most especially relevant to a ranking such as this one now. Several of my favorite tracks on Blurry Face are favorites from the moment I first heard them, aging in my mind like a fine wine despite the years since I've had the pleasure of tasting them. The darker tone and sheer creativity on display with every song is almost unbearably addicting in ways that I don't think I fully understand, let alone have the words to express. Even when the album takes a stark turn halfway through to something that seems unfitting and broadly different in style, I still find myself really enjoying it. I think Blurry Face is the only TOP album that does not contain a song I actively dislike, whereas all the others have at least one song I would consider skipping if I wasn't such a hellbent adherent to the never skip a song mentality when listening to albums. The fact that I've come around to songs I previously didn't enjoy as much only makes this even more true for me as time has gone on. Oh, also, if I were a musician the likes of my little brother, I would totally make a metalcore or deathcore cover of this full album. It's just so conducive to those styles of songwriting in really strange ways, to be honest. Maybe that's just a me thing, but yeah, Blurry Face is not too far from perfect for me. Now for the standout tracks. Heavy Dirty Soul, Stressed Out, Ride, Fairly Local, The Judge, Message Man, and Not Today, with my four favorites being Ride, Fairly Local, The Judge, and Not Today, with, question marks on The Judge and Not Today because I couldn't figure out which one of those two is actually my third favorite song on the record, so just go with me on that. 21 Pilots is such an odd band to try to rank, or even simply review if you happen to be like me and use comparisons to come to conclusions about art. Sure, comparisons aren't always appropriate, and I'm glad to say I do know when not to get too hung up on it most of the time, but in ranking these albums, I had to let go of the major comparison factors to get anything done, of course. This band has made a pretty starkly different record with basically every release, only really discounting the bridge from regional at best to Vessel. Everything else has an identity all its own, for better or for worse. Different fans will love different albums, and different aspects of each one will stand out amongst the crowd depending on who you are. For me, maybe nostalgia and petty comparison influences portions of my ranking, but clear eyes and a fresh mind has let me see the rest of TOP's discography very differently. I didn't foresee myself liking Scaled and Icy at all, and I didn't think I'd come out more than on Clancy. But I've come to really like almost everything released by this band, a body of work nearly entirely crafted and constructed by Tyler Joseph and Josh Dunn, a duo of friends who've never let up since the beginning and whom I've come to respect over watching some live streams and other material of them. But the fact is that for a band that does such different and unique things with their sound and manages to switch it up with every album on top of that, TOP is a surprise breakout through and through. Sure, one could argue that they got famous due to easy radio hits, and maybe that's true to a degree, but they never let that bind them in place or root them into that style and create the same song over and over again. Maybe that popularity influenced aspects of their songwriting still, but the fact that they still insisted on writing a 4-album story and fans got invested and they haven't fallen off their perch all the while is a testament to their versatility, and not least because they could switch it up without losing every fan they had. Scaled and Icy had a rocky reception, especially following after the fan favorite Trench, but I don't think these guys have lost any steam at all in the end. 21 Pilots is by no means one of my absolute favorite bands, and they reside almost nowhere near the type of music I most often explore and listen to, but that doesn't mean I dislike them. I, in fact, like this music group far more than I did before last month, as recent as a little while after Clancy's release. But even if they aren't an abject favorite, their unique sense of style and musicality definitely earns them an honorable mention in my favorite artists of all time. I think they might just see themselves back and more fully in my regular rotation for the foreseeable future. Thank you to my brother for helping me to see beyond the monster hit that was stressed out, and for introducing me to what this band actually was, and in some sense could be, and for being the main reason I'm into so much of the music I'm into now, more than just 21 Pilots.